So I want to welcome everybody to tonight's webinar on Project Blitz. This is a presentation that is co-sponsored by the Humanists of Tallahassee, or HOTS, as well as the Tallahassee Freethinkers Forum, in conjunction with the American Atheist. I'm Devin Graham. I'm the VP of HOT, as well as the American Atheist Assistant State Director here in Tallahassee. I'm going to go over a little bit of housekeeping. First, like He-Man, I have the power to mute all of you, which I have just done. So we're going to keep everyone muted to eliminate the background noise. We're going to hold all questions to the end, and when Sarah's done talking, I'll unmute you all. You can manually mute yourself if you aren't speaking. And if you can ask questions then, and if you don't want to talk aloud, there's a chat function off to the side that you can use and send questions to me, and I'll ask those for you. This event is being recorded, just FYI. We may try to put it up on our YouTube page, which has nothing on it at the moment. So this will be a first. And I think that's it. So getting right into this, Sarah Ray is here with us tonight. She is a co-founder and co-director of the atheist community of Polk County. This group is pretty amazing. Pretty much overnight, they went from just Becca, her wife, and a couple others to this huge group in Polk County. If you're not from Florida, Polk County is pretty rural, I guess is the word. I don't know, area. Yeah. But huge growth, great community involvement, and something I'd really like to emulate here in Tallahassee. Sarah's the host of the Sarah Talks podcast, as well as the Free Thought in Florida show, which I hope you all check out. It's on the atheist community of Polk County's YouTube page. The guest on December 16th of last year was pretty amazing. It was me. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. This is a whole new platform for me, and I'm using a new teleprompter software too, so we'll see how all of the technology works together for us, but I've got a good old paper backup if I need it. And normally I'll start this out by saying, has anybody seen this presentation before? Show of hands when I do this in public. And then I say, if you have, it's pretty much the same as it was the last time I gave it. There hasn't been a whole lot of changes, but if you have seen it before, then the good news is you know where all the jokes are, and so you can laugh for me, because that's the hardest part of doing this thing online, is I'm not going to get the feedback. And I thought about adding some drum beats and maybe some laughter on a soundboard, but I will spare you the bad comedy there. So my name is Sarah Ray. I'm a godless heathen atheist. I'm also a trans woman. My pronouns are she and her. And tonight we're going to do a deep dive into the legislative effort called Project Blitz. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with at least parts of this already. But before we get into that, I thought I would tell you a little bit about myself and the journey that brought me to atheism and queer activism, and my own interest in Project Blitz. And I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version, but just to kind of give you a quick look of where I come from for some context. So I was born in 1979 in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. Well, not in that log cabin, but the day my mother went into labor, she was sitting on our wraparound porch nailing in deck boards. We lived in the garage while the house was being finished, and this was about 5 miles outside of a small town, Bethany, Illinois, which is right about here. It's about halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, nestled between acres and acres of farmland. We had a horse and goats and chickens and rabbits and a big furry English sheepdog that we sheared down every spring. I had a pet turkey named Job of the biblical, and yes, there's a funny story that I cut for time, but if you want to hear that sometime, I'd be happy to share it with you. Just let me know. So when I was 7, then we moved off the farm to the city, Bethany, Illinois. Population around 1,500, just a small Midwest town. I had a high school graduating class of 32. There were no chain businesses. The nearest town worth driving to is about 35 minutes away. This here is downtown with, the 2 whole blocks of Main Street with classic brick buildings. But we had a local diner and a locally owned video rental and arcade. and a farm insurance agency, and across the street was the bank. And this was a time and place when doors were rarely locked, and we rode our bikes all over town without anybody worrying about, getting hit by a car or snatched up by somebody. I like to say it was corn, soybeans, and why should I have to press 1 for English? We live in America, white people, as far as the eye can see. Bethany, Illinois, 0 stoplights, 8 churches. And for the longest time I told this story, I said 9 churches, but one of them shut down and was I think it was a bed and breakfast for a little bit, and then like an antique or a knickknack shop. And it's for sale again now, in case you're interested in owning a church from 1916, a 5-bed, 4-bath, single-family home with an attached sanctuary, all yours for the reasonable asking price of $40,000. We had a Baptist church and a Presbyterian church and 2 Methodist churches. Just everybody went to church. This is the church that my family attended, the First Christian Church of Bethany, Illinois. And, in Sunday school, mostly I learned to tear out the little perforated Bible characters, the little stickers that you licked on the back and stuck them into your workbook. You remember these? Well, my elementary school music teacher was also the kids' music teacher and sometimes pianist at church. My granny tended the nursery. My dad was a deacon for a time. And looking back, though, my family didn't take it too seriously. We were in church on Sunday mornings. We prayed before important meals and the holidays. But I think that lack of seriousness was, forgiving the pun, a blessing. We didn't spend a lot of time outside of church talking about God or the Bible or their beliefs. And it's just not something we even really talk about much today. But for a short time, I really got into it. And this is probably the earliest memory of my activist tendencies. And it foreshadows the topic that we'll get into shortly. In high school, I started a Bible study group. And one year, I even organized a Meet Me at the Pole. Yes, I was one of those. Look how excited I am here. That's Bibleopoly, the Jesus ripoff of Monopoly. Actually asked for that as a gift. I even wrote and gave a couple of sermons in my teens, and I had a fancy youth study Bible that, we'd picked up from the mustard seed store or something. And we'd use the study topics inside this fancy youth Bible to prepare group discussions in our school group. But even then, a young student in the mid-90s in that rural, sheltered, profoundly Christian town, I knew that there were legal concerns. And so I researched and I studied, and I became what I thought at the time was an expert on my rights as a Christian student. And I probably got that information from a resource like this one. This is from the website of the organization behind Project Blitz, the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, in a section called Freedom of Religious Expression in Public Schools. I knew that while our small school didn't have a lot of extracurricular groups like math or chess club, if the school provided a venue for those groups, they had to provide one to my Bible club too. That's number 8 on this list. I knew that it had to be student organized and student led, and outside of, getting permission from a teacher to use a classroom, I knew that no faculty could be involved. We met during lunch in, of all ironic places, the biology lab where we learned biology from our very Christian biology teacher. Well, it was around this time that I started feeling different in other ways. Puberty was doing things to my body that I just didn't really understand, but not in the way that, a normal boy is confused by puberty changes. I didn't feel right in my own body, and I became obsessed with thoughts of what it might be like to be a girl. Why wasn't I a girl? How great it would be to just wake up tomorrow a girl. Words like transgender didn't exist back then. People were jokes on the Jerry Springer show. I didn't know my wife was a man. And gay was even still a 4-letter word in my small town. And so I learned very quickly that being different, especially being different in this way, was not good. And I hid it, and I experimented in private. And I did what a lot of young people like me, young trans people, do, which is to explore femininity in the only way I could find, borrowing clothes from my mom and sisters. And eventually I got caught several times. My mother made an appointment with a therapist, which normally I would recommend, but it was obvious that this therapist had never encountered anything like this before and had no idea what to do. And rather than try to find a different, more qualified therapist, we just sort of agreed that this wasn't working. Eventually, I had a major nervous breakdown in the hallway at school one day. This was like my 8th grade or freshman year. I was diagnosed with ADHD and clinical depression, and my grades were in the tank. They pulled me from public school and homeschooled me for a couple of years. And like most people dealing with gender dysphoria, as we know now, not really having a community or any resources to learn from, I just sort of stuffed all of that into the closet. And that's something that I got very good at over the years. When I moved out on my own, out of that small town, I finally had the freedom to buy my own feminine clothes online and really start exploring my identity, even if still in private. But I had also stopped going to church. I drank a lot, I smoked a carton of cigarettes a week, and I had a lot of sex with a lot of people. I became worldly. Well, I was supposed to be going to college. That's another story for another time. I got involved with a local radio station in Decatur, Illinois, where I took up a part-time board operator job and quickly moved up to producer of the Byers and Company morning show on News Talk 1340 WSOY AM Decatur. We were the #1 morning show in Central Illinois year after year after year. And after our 3-hour show, we had a very classic conservative talk radio lineup. G. Gordon Liddy, Rush Limbaugh, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, Sean Hannity, Mike Gallagher. And of course, on Sunday, we had Christian programming. Well, I ended up back in church around this time a Church of God for a girl, and it was usually for a girl. But this place was like no church I had ever encountered before. I grew up in a church where, you stay quiet and listen until it's time to stand up and sing. And this place was raise your hands and shout if the Spirit moves you kind of place. And it was like culture shock. But they had a praise band, and I play guitar. And so it wasn't long before I was playing guitar in the praise band, and it wasn't long after that I really started thinking and questioning my beliefs and really doubting, oddly, thanks to the youth pastor. We were doing a one-on-one Bible study with this youth pastor, and he had me going through chapter by chapter, writing down the truths and the promises. And well, as the saying goes, one of the easiest ways to become an atheist is actually read the Bible, and I read it cover to cover. The more I read, the less I believed. I eventually left that church, and that was the last church that I ever attended. And then it was only after moving to Central Florida 12 years ago or so that I was able to really sort of break through that rural conservative mindset that had been my whole experience growing up. I started my podcast, Sarah Talk, in 2015 to talk about my gender transition. How did my family react to coming out? How would HR and my leaders and coworkers respond when I made this announcement? What's it like taking cross-sex hormones? What's the process like to even do that? The podcast was sort of soft and fluffy like this for a while until North Carolina passed House Bill 2 that remanded all restroom users to only use restrooms that match their genitals as determined by a doctor at birth. Texas had one that they attempted not long after that. And then suddenly this personal experience fluff show that we did became a lot more political, a lot more critical of religion, and a lot more activist-y. While I was supposed to be, let's see. So it was then when we got into this show and started doing more of the activism, I really discovered that when there's an attack on the queer community, when our basic rights to exist in a free society are under attack, it's almost always coming from someone wearing a MAGA hat, holding a Bible, or more often, both. And so I found my activism standing at this intersection of queer and atheist communities. So considering then my rural roots and understanding the need for community, we looked at some local groups here and eventually decided to start our own. So we formed the atheist community of Polk County to provide opportunities for secular people in the county to come together around these common goals. Well, I think that's enough old home movies, but hopefully this sort of frames the perspective that I'm coming from, and that brings us then to Project Blitz. Now, Project Blitz is the backbone of the religious rights efforts to install Christian dominionism in the United States under the guise of religious liberty. So a change of decor is in order. There we go, that's better. The Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, Incorporated, was established in 2005 by Randy Forbes to work alongside members of the Congressional Prayer Caucus in order to build a network of like-minded government leaders who are committed to prayer and action. That quickly spread out to the states and became about legislating an agenda well beyond networking and praying together. The dark blue color on this map shows the states where a state legislative prayer caucus has been established. And you'll see here in Florida, we have the yellow dot, which indicates that we have a state director here. According to their website, the Florida Legislative Prayer Caucus is an official Florida caucus whose members are state legislators committed to advancing policies and initiatives that promote religious freedom, America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and prayer. Nothing insidious there. And so the Project Blitz playbook was created for these legislators to use, in their own words, to protect the free exercise of traditional Judeo-Christian values and beliefs, reclaim and properly define the narrative, to see public discourse understood and defined on their terms, to reclaim and properly frame the narrative in the language of religious liberty issues. Emphasis here is mine, but notice that this is all about rewriting the narrative and definition of religious liberty through influencing state legislation. To put this into perspective, Protect Thy Neighbor, a project of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, documented 86 bills filed in state legislatures across the country in 2015, most of which are right out of the Project Blitz playbook. The most common of these bills would allow discrimination against LGBTQ Americans and deny access to reproductive health care, as well as a few more nefarious ones. Adding up all the bills from 2015 to 2018, that total number swelled to over 370. Thankfully, many of those didn't pass, but the ones that did are clearing the path for others. In the last 2 years, more than 130 Project Blitz bills were introduced in 35 states, with 15 bills passing, and at last count, over 45 had been filed in 2020 already. Now let's see if this video will work for you. You'll love this.
Did y'all know that I am a commissioner? That governmental anointing, you know, we prophesy. I never knew it was going to fall on me. I'm going to say that one more time. I am an elected official. That's crazy. A demon buster that write laws. Only God could do something like that. You know, when I come in the pulpit, you know, there's something that happens to me and I can just flow. But God had to anoint me to go in the gates of the city, to go in the chambers of the city, to write laws and to be able to debate and write legislation so that his kingdom could come and manifest itself like never before.
Everybody know that woman? I hope you all do. You're right up in there in the thick of it. That's, of course, Apostle Kimberly Daniels, who runs a side hustle ministry where demonic possession, exorcism, prosperity gospel, and claims of personal revelation of prophecy from God or Norm. Democratic State Representative for House District 14, Kim Daniels, who, you will recall, in the wake of tragedy, used the Parkland school shooting to advance a bill that she had filed that would require the national motto, "In God We Trust," be displayed in all our public schools, which that bill, of course, passed with overwhelming support. That bill comes right out of the Project Blitz playbook. She filed House Bill 303, which passed in 2017 and bans school districts from discriminating against students, parents, and school personnel on the basis of religious viewpoint or expression. But you can see here that she promoted it as putting prayer back in school. That's also a Project Blitz bill. In 2019, she sponsored a bill that would require all public high schools in Florida to offer an elective class studying the Bible. Some of you are already ahead of me, but put a pin in this. We'll come back in a minute. The Christian nationalist movement is well organized, well funded. Data taken from publicly available copies of the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation's annual tax filings show an average annual revenue of about $2 million. And you can see here they're also spending every penny. And of course, their mission is supported indirectly from other organizations that you'll be familiar with, whose revenues are much, much, much higher, like the Liberty Council, Beckett
Sarah,
Fund.
did you put the screen back on?
Oh, you're not seeing it?
No, sorry.
That's okay. No, thank you. There you go.
There we go.
The Liberty Council, Beckett Fund, Family Research Council, and the ACLJ. And topping these charts, Alliance Defending Freedom, whose revenues recently exceeded $50 million. Now, that's not to say that money is everything, of course, but it's a pretty good indicator of just how well organized these efforts are. They're highly, highly invested. So Project Blitz, otherwise known as the Report and Analysis on Religious Freedom Measures Impacting Prayer and Faith in America. Look, I come from Disney. We need to acronym this stuff, okay, because that's just too much. But it's a document over 140 pages that is written to be given to state legislators that details this goal of Project Blitz. It includes cherry-picked studies and outright false claims, model legislation, and talking points. And they offer resources, including lawyers trained in constitutional law who can help write this legislation and defend the bill if it gets challenged. Now, before we go, let me add a disclaimer here. I'm just a concerned citizen, right? I'm not a legal expert, but you don't have to be. So much of this is just plainly written, but don't take legal advice from a PowerPoint presentation. So Project Blitz was divided into three main categories: legislation regarding our country's religious heritage, resolutions on religious history and freedom, and religious liberty protection. And the initial idea was that some of these things they want to do were going to be easier to pass and meet less resistance than others. So they were going to use those to focus first and test the waters just to see, which states were going to be receptive. And then they would move on to the ones that would be harder to pass. Well, one of those easy ones was the "In God We Trust" display in our schools. And it worked here, didn't it? So rather than look at these in that sort of order, I think it's a little more interesting to look at them by more of who is affected. To be Christian is to be American. To be American is to be Christian. A lot of these efforts are aimed at basically just rewriting history to make this a Christian nation from the start. The first category I want to look at is education. So we had the National Motto Display Act. That's the Kim Daniels pushed through the Florida legislature, displaying "In God We Trust" in all of our schools. Currently, 7 states have passed this, and several others have laws encouraging but not necessarily requiring the display. These two go hand in hand. They're promoting certain historical documents as being related to the nation's founding, like the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, even the Mayflower Compact, the Northwest Ordinance. The Civic Literacy Act would require high school students to study these documents as a graduation requirement. We don't have enough of those yet, and encourage teachers to read or post excerpts. The Religion and Legal History Act provides for displays of these documents in state buildings. So this seems harmless enough, right? Well, they provide some sample excerpts The Mayflower Compact includes, quote, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, and so on. And Washington's farewell address, quote, and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. Let's hang that in every state house. Yes, maybe all relevant to the study of history, but it's clear, it's easy to see that the narrative is really about this was and was always meant to be a Christian nation. And for bills like these, the message is, look, this is just about history, right? Our kids should be studying history. So these are expected to pass fairly easily. A quick stop back to our friend, Democratic Representative and self-described demon buster, Kim Daniels. This photo is a screen grab from a video where she's speaking in tongues to a packed house. This year was the second year that she filed the Bible Literacy Act here in Florida, and thankfully it again died in committee. So the Bible Literacy Act, exactly what it sounds like, they're suggesting that states require schools to offer elective classes on the Bible, Old and New Testaments, to grades 9 and above, with a purpose of teaching students a knowledge of biblical content, characters, poetry, and narratives that are prerequisites to understanding contemporary society and culture. Now, the bill wouldn't prohibit schools from offering electives on other holy texts or religions, but the Christian one would be law. How can this not be seen as preferencing or endorsing one religion above all others or none? Currently, Bible courses are taught in public schools in 7 states, all in the South, of course. I'm sure you could have guessed that. Well, last year, Representative Anna Eskamani challenged the bill, asking Daniels, my family is Iranian American. My family identifies with Islam. Would you consider adding the Quran to your bill to be a friendly amendment as another holy book that can be taught objectively to your language? Daniels replied simply, no. Some text from that bill. The district school board shall install in the public school in the district a secular program of education, including but not limited to an objective study of religion, whatever objective means in this case, an objective study of the Bible, including but not limited to a course on the Hebrew Scriptures and Old Testament of the Bible, and a course on the New Testament of the Bible must be offered as an elective to students in grades 9 through 12, copy and paste right out of the Project Blitz playbook. What does objective study mean? A secular program? Whose translation and interpretation do we get to use? How can you be objective toward religion and the Bible when even the basic tenets of Scripture are disputed by some estimates over 30,000 denominations? And in places where these classes already exist, there's studies showing that they're not exactly being taught very objectively. Kentucky passed a Bible class bill in 2017, and a review by the ACLU found that many of the offered courses straight out violated the Constitution. This is my surprised face. Now, feel free to disagree with me here. I host a talk show. People disagree with me about all sorts of things, but make it an elective comparative world religions class. Study the religions of the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians alongside the Bible. Learn about Islam and Hinduism. Study the things in the Bible that we know are pretty much ripped straight from the glyphs of more ancient beliefs. Virgin births, December 25th, the winter solstice, great flood myths, sun gods, these aren't unique to Christianity. And like actually reading the Bible often fosters skepticism in the right environment, so too might a comparative study of these beliefs throughout time and around the world. Put that class in my kids' high school elective list and I'd be on board. Bible class? No thanks. Now, when I engage with people on this one, a lot of times I'll hear, well, Sarah, it's an elective. It's not like they're forcing your kid to take it. Well, let me ask you all, put on your skeptic hats. Is that a well-reasoned response? What could possibly go wrong with an elective Bible class? While this model legislation is targeted at high schools, other public schools around the country offer voluntary Bible classes in much earlier grades. In December of 2018, Elizabeth Deal in West Virginia took a lawsuit to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, having had her case dismissed by the lower court. Essentially, in first grade, her daughter and another girl who were not enrolled in their school's Bible class were put into a coat closet by the teacher and the pastor and given an iPad to amuse themselves with while the class took place. In third grade, the bullying started. Deal said, quote, "The kids started telling her that she and her family were all going to hell. One girl saw the Harry Potter book that she was reading and slammed it down on her desk, yelling, 'You don't need to be reading this witch magic stuff. You should be reading the Bible.'" End quote. Now, the problem, of course, with such a course being offered as an elective is that, especially in heavily Christian areas, it singles out the one or two kids that don't take the class. Take the very likely possibility of harassment and bullying of kids who don't take the class, even as an elective, it's still allocating public taxpayer funds to a religious purpose, regardless of how objective and secular you claim the class might be. And did you catch in there that they're having a pastor help teach that class in West Virginia? 14 Bible literacy bills were filed in various states in 2018. Only Tennessee's became law. Christian teachers being censored for their religious views doesn't really seem to be a big problem. But the Blitz paints the picture that Christian teachers are just super persecuted. So the Teacher Protection Act provides remedy for a school district, teacher, board member, or other employee that is sued regarding constitutionally protected religious expression. Under this act, those individuals could request assistance from the Attorney General to defend them in court. And assistance here also means indemnification by the state for damages and costs of any type, including legal fees and court costs. So they argue here that teachers and administrators are so confused by inconsistent federal court rulings and so afraid of lawsuits that sometimes they might make the wrong decision. Sometimes they might stifle students' freedom of religious expression, even if they thought they were acting in good faith. Or that when they do allow a student to express their religious belief, Andrew Seidel over at the Freedom from Religion Foundation is banging away on an old typewriter already. This is one of the points where you should laugh. So the Student Prayer Certification Act. The U.S. Congress enacted useless legislation that requires, you probably didn't know this, I sure didn't, requires public elementary and secondary schools to certify that they have no policy that prevents or otherwise denies participation in constitutionally protected prayer. Did you know this? Federal law requires schools to submit annually in writing an affidavit to the state education agency that says, we don't have a policy preventing constitutionally protected prayer. The Federal Department of Education can withhold funding from a public school who doesn't comply with this reporting policy. The Student Prayer Certification Act would essentially copy that down from federal law into state law, which then adds an additional burden of having to, each school having to reach out to even more agencies to file this affidavit that they don't have. It's just an additional burden on school districts that are already underfunded and strapped as it is. And then finally, the Preserving Religious Freedom in School Act. A lot of this just reinforces what's already protected. School districts can't discriminate on the basis of religious viewpoint or expression. Students can use religious beliefs in their coursework or artwork. They can organize prayer groups and clubs. This is the stuff that I learned in junior high in the 90s and knew to be my rights then as a student. So this act wouldn't really change much, but it does specifically provide that teachers or coaches, for example, could participate in student-initiated prayer. Despite court rulings that find that even bowing your head during a student-led prayer can be seen as endorsing the act or religion, especially considering the authoritative position that school employees have over students. So those are all sort of items that directly affect public education. Next, let's look at the efforts to just change the narrative in the general public about religious freedom. The National Motto License Plate Act. This one's fun. This would require states to offer special "In God We Trust" license plate designs. Legislation for car owners to choose these designs is already on the books in many states, but their hope here is that having the national motto on license plates will serve as moving billboards of a Christian nation. Well, last year, the Secular Coalition of Arizona discovered that $17 from each one of their "In God We Trust" license plates was being donated to Christian nationalist and anti-LGBT hate group Alliance Defending Freedom, who you'll remember from earlier has revenues that make Scrooge McDuck's money bin look like pocket change. The next few are proclamations, so not laws, right? These are about states sending sort of a message to the public, governmental recognition of Christianity. We have a proclamation recognizing Religious Freedom Day. This is basically a state-level version of the National Religious Freedom Proclamation. And again, this is all about bending the narrative about religious freedom. They use cherry-picked quotes from the founders. Do you think it mentions the religious freedoms of those of no faith? Oddly, yes, but it's one little small blip at the very end of the proclamation, almost as an afterthought. The proclamation recognizing Christian Heritage Week, well, when one day just isn't enough, let's celebrate all week long. This one includes a number of quotes from historical figures too, including Franklin, Jefferson, and Madison. This one starts, picture your governor or leader of the House, Speaker of the House. Religious faith was not only important in official American life during the periods of discovery, exploration, colonization, and growth, but also has been acknowledged and incorporated into all three branches of American federal government from their very beginning. This nation was founded on principles of religious freedom, and our founding fathers sought God, His blessings, and guidance as they established these United States of America as free and independent nation. Citation needed. Well, even the first act of America's very first Congress in 1774 was to ask a minister to open with a prayer and to lead Congress in reading 4 chapters of the Bible. And you thought legislative sessions on the Florida Channel was boring. Sorry, I slipped into Polk County Southern there for a minute. It just comes naturally with the territory. We had a proclamation recognizing the importance of the Bible in history. Do you see the pattern? Well, where the first two were spinning a story that the founders' belief in God informed all of their decisions in building our government, this one will try to convince you that the Bible itself was foundational to our government too. They say, Gutenberg chose the Bible to be the first book off his new printing press invention. The Bible has been translated into 3,223 languages. Surveys report that 9 out of 10 Americans have Bibles in their home. I'd love to be able to see you all. How many of you have a Bible in your home? Here's 2 of mine, happily provided to us by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. See, my wife is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And we've explored this a little bit on our podcast, but the newer version is missing entire sections, whole sections that were included in the older version because, you know, the old guys in New York had New Light from God or whatever and made some edits. So we keep Bibles around not because we believe them, mostly to show the errors and inconsistencies and nonsense and have a laugh. So out of the 9 out of 10, you know, how many of those actually believe or have even read them? But never mind the facts. They also cite the earliest public education law in America, which was in 1642, that declared it being the chief project of that old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures, as in former times. It is therefore ordered that after the Lord hath increased the settlement to the number of 50 householders, they shall then forthwith appoint one within their town to teach all children to write and read. So there you go. Schools were expressly created so that people could read the Bible. See, we did kick God out of the school. And finally, a proclamation recognizing Christmas Day. Are you shitting me? It's already a national holiday. The final grouping of Project Blitz initiatives here I like to call weaponizing Christianity. During a town hall with Florida legislators in Lake County in August of 2019, Representative Anthony Sabatini here proclaimed that the need to protect students from discrimination in charter schools is all made up. One distinction, that question was not about charter schools, which are technically public schools. This was about private schools. And it won't surprise you to know that the private schools in question, the ones who have discriminatory policies for admission and hiring, are religious schools. And those schools are the beneficiary of voucher scholarship money in Florida to the tune of nearly $1 billion over the next 5 years. And they keep expanding it. That may even be higher now since we've just tweaked some more. Now, you may recall before the whole coronavirus pandemic distracted us from everything else going on, there were some major corporations that funded these voucher programs that decided to pull their funding from the program because of discrimination like this. And who knows how effective that might actually be in the long run. So under policies, public policy resolutions, there are 3 blatant attempts on the queer community. Now, these resolutions just express a legislative agenda, right? So we have a resolution establishing public policy favoring intimate sexual relations only between married heterosexual couples. A resolution establishing public policy favoring reliance on and maintenance of birth gender. That was for me. Well, when equality is under attack, atheists have to show up, right? And so here they make a veiled attempt to hide the religious bigotry behind garbage science. They claim the science concerning same-sex attraction and behavior is not settled, while the consequences associated with such behavior are well understood. And they argue that the state has a compelling interest in preferring same-sex marriages, Supreme Court ruling notwithstanding. I don't understand how the state has any interest in who you sleep with, but okay. Fun story, and I'll try real hard to stay apolitical here. But the National Republican Party platform includes a section called Defending Marriage Against an Activist Judiciary, which condemns the Obergefell ruling, stating that, quote, traditional marriage and family based on marriage between one man and one woman is the foundation for a free society and has for millennia been entrusted with rearing children and instilling cultural values. They also argue available scientific evidence does not support the assertion that gender identity is an innate fixed property of human beings that is independent of biological sex. And they say most children who experience cross-gender identification don't continue to do so into adolescence or adulthood. Well, that's just outright false. First, science is showing us more and more that gender is a spectrum and that the binary is more of a social construct. And second, we haven't really studied transgender youth into adulthood in any large enough scale to make a claim like this. But anecdotally, the examples that we do have show the opposite. They also say members of the transgender population are at significantly higher risk of a variety of mental health problems compared to members of the non-transgender population. Well, sure. Maybe we wouldn't have higher rates of mental health issues if you'd stop telling us that we're sinners and going to hell and can't use restrooms and have to pass through all these expensive, time-consuming hoops just to change our driver's license. They point out that the high rates of suicide attempts and self-harm reported by community, and they're not wrong, but again, how much of that is brought on by the mistreatment that we receive, particularly at the hands of faith communities? In the same way that they spent decades doing with homosexuality, they try to spin this as a disease of the mind that should be treated as a psychological problem. And then we have the resolution establishing public policy favoring adoption by intact heterosexual marriage-based families, which is, of course, the precursor to bills allowing adoption and foster placement agencies to play the religious freedom card and deny gay couples in adoption. Here they make the argument that it's in the best interest of the children to be in a stable family environment, which of course the icky gays could never provide. 10 states currently have laws on the books allowing religious-based discrimination by child welfare agencies. But wait, there's more. These resolutions then turn into legislation. The Marriage Tolerance Act, better known to you probably as the First Amendment Defense Act, which is now rebranded, quote, an act to prohibit discriminatory action against a person who believes, speaks, or acts in accordance with a sincerely held religious belief that marriage is or should be recognized as a union of one man and one woman, or that sexual relations are properly reserved to such marriage. The Child Protection Act, here they want to ensure that adoption and foster agencies can be free to discriminate based on the free exercise clause. And they even say that this act is not intended to limit or deny any person's right to adopt a child or participate in foster care. Except that's exactly what it does by allowing child-placing agencies with sincerely held religious beliefs to refuse to adopt to gay people or non-Christian couples or interracial couples or really anything that could pass the deeply held religious belief threshold. At the end of January last year, South Carolina's governor asked the United States Department of Health and Human Services to issue a waiver, and they did, that allows a state-supported, faith-based foster agency to discriminate against prospective gay foster parents and even non-Christians after a Jewish woman was rejected by the group. Now, what infuriates me about this the most, I think, is that the perception seems to be you would rather a child be homeless or stuck in a system or age out of the system rather than be placed with capable, loving, gay or non-Christian parents. And that tells me everything I need to know. We have the Clergy Protection Act. This is an act relating to the protection of clergy and religious organizations for honoring a sincerely held religious belief relating to participation in lawful marriage. Again, this is another solution in search of a problem. You know, nobody's forcing clergy to go marry gay people, right? As for religious organizations, there's a tie-in to Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, where the courts poorly decided that businesses can have religious beliefs, and you know, businesses are people too, my friend. So they cite bakers and florists whose religious freedom was violated by non-discrimination ordinances, and subsequently they lost their businesses in the resulting legal battle and public response. In the Licensed Professional Civil Rights Act, same sort of idea here, except this is a protection where the state requires an occupational license. So you have to be licensed by the state. Well, the problem, they argue, is that professionals are being censored or deprived of their chosen livelihoods, not because of poor service to their clients, but because of disagreements with or disapproval of their sincerely held religious beliefs, such as it not being ethical to participate in or facilitate abortion, or same-sex sexual intercourse, or transgender operations. Aspiring professionals are also being turned away, they argue, from schools and not being granted degrees because of their sincerely held religious beliefs. This, they say, is hostile to religious belief, of course, never addressing the hostility of the religious beliefs themselves. Okay, that's a lot to take in, I know. On October 24th, 2019, during a Project Blitz strategy call with legislators and staff from almost 20 states, Leah Carawan, executive director for the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, explained that the original Project Blitz playbook was necessary because they felt they were, quote, getting beat as it relates to religious freedom legislation. So they're trying to rebrand Project Blitz to Freedom for All. No, not because Project Blitz evokes World War II imagery. No, because we're on to them. So I'm going to try to play a clip here of that phone call. Let me know if it doesn't come through.
And the Project Blitz is now renamed Freedom for All for the same reason, very strategically. The other side finally caught on to what you all were doing and the massive legislation that was going forth across the nation, the incredible successes all across the nation, and they were scratching their heads saying, what in the world happened? They started talking about Project Blitz, and as soon as we understood that they knew they were onto us, we changed the name, shifted things around a little bit. Now they're talking about something that nobody else has really been talking about, and we've renamed and moved on, but it's moving just as strong and just as powerfully. The first year we rolled it out, we had about an 800% increase in the passage of successful religious freedom legislation. And each subsequent year, 800% increase, in this last year, 900% increase in 2019. It has been enormously successful using exactly the strategic process, looking at an opportunity, taking advantage of that opportunity, accessing the networks that we've been building, and then seeing the solution and then shifting. It's not something you put in place and leave. You look at it, you assess it, you revise it, and you continue to make it better every year.
Kind of creepy to listen in behind the curtain, isn't it?
And
So they know that we know that they know that we know that they know that we know. Well, Project Blitz or Freedom for All, but only really Christians, whatever you want to call it, we're still on to you. And in light of all of this, I should say, I find some comfort. This is dark stuff, and it's a lot to soak in, I know. So I wanted to sort of try to find the light. And I find some comfort in the fact that polling continues to show that the majority of Americans, this is not representative of the views of the majority of this nation. If only our government were representative of the actual diversity of Americans. And over recent years, the number of people who identify as religious or attend religious services or find religion important in their lives is dropping. Recent general social survey data showed that the religious nuns are now the largest, quote, religious demographic in the US, which is slightly larger than Catholics and evangelicals. And research continues to show that younger generations are less and less religious than any generation before. And those lazy millennials who just take everything for granted and don't want to work a hard day's work, well, they're actually out organizing and challenging our politicians, and they're running for office and they're winning. We can debate the finer points of gun control, but the activism that came out of Parkland in the hours and days and weeks after that tragic school shooting shows us that young people really do care about politics, and they are engaged, and they're going to change this world. I'm reminded of the protest sign. You've probably seen it. If you build a wall, my generation will tear it down. Our young people don't deserve the claims of apathy so often hurled at them. My generation does. I didn't get involved until my mid-30s, but I see in our youth a new wave of civic responsibility, of compassion for those that are different than them, and with that, a strong sense of urgency. And let's not all take this the wrong way, right? Let's not put us older folks out to pasture just yet. We all have an important role to play. The challenge for organizers now is to match talents with needs. But I do want to underscore the importance of our youth. They have many, many more years left in this state, in this country, on this planet than I do. The leaders of today, we have to be preparing to shift to more of an advisory role and willingly allow ourselves, and I know this is hard, to guide our young people into taking over the reins of leadership. Are we engaging our youth now so that they'll be ready? Do we have succession planning in our groups, in the movement? You know, it boggles my mind, this movement to return to the good old days. What, when queer people couldn't come out of the closet, and when we're supposed to be at home making babies and sandwiches, and what black folks were forced to drink from separate drinking fountains. And yes, of course, much, much worse. These were our good old days? For some, yes. And yes, I have fond memories of my childhood, but I'm not clamoring for a return to the 80s. Okay, fine. I have a special place in my heart for, old Microsoft software and the original Nintendo, but you get the point. Even with all of our current social challenges, generally speaking, more things are better for more people now than have in our history. Why go back? I'm looking forward. As a humanist, as a parent, I just want to leave my kids a world that's a little better than when I came into it. And in this stage of my life, I'm realizing it's becoming less and less about what I want and more about helping them create the world they want to live in. So what the hell do we do? What role should you and I play? And if you're like me, after sifting through all of this stuff, I felt overwhelmed, maybe a little hopeless, definitely attacked in many ways. But once that passed, I realized we need to shout this stuff from the rooftops, to have the hot white light of reason and science wash across its pages. We need to get organized and get together and have a plan. Sometimes it feels like we're powerless to these forces that are working around us. And like most things, there's not a magic bullet that's going to stop Project Blitz. But I thought I'd share some of my personal goals with you that may be helpful for you as we all try to sort of find our place in this moment. First, let's agree that we'll try to avoid things that don't support our goals. Sharing memes that mock religion feels good, and I know we all do it. I'm certainly guilty, and we even created a Meme Monday thing in our group because constantly dumping memes into the feed is it's overwhelming. It's too much. So we even had to limit it in our Facebook group. But constantly screaming into the echo chamber, that doesn't support my goals. Having all caps fights on Twitter and Facebook with believers isn't going to advance my goals. There's a time, a place, and a benefit to us being able to come together sort of like this and, you know, have a good laugh and talk about how silly religion is and gods aren't real and roll our eyes. But we have to step out of this bubble sometimes and get out from behind the keyboard. Hard to do at this moment, I'm aware, but focus on the goals. Let's educate and empower our youth. We can't rely on schoolhouse rocks anymore. And if I've learned anything from my 10-year-old son, it's that kids can often handle topics we think are too complex or over our heads. If you'd like to hear the story of how he and I had a conversation about intactivists and circumcision, I'd be happy to tell you that story sometime too. But we take our kids to the March for the Rally in Lakeland. We took our kids to the Science March in Orlando. We all go to Pride every year. We took them to Tallahassee to the Teacher March. We take them to vote in every election. Am I preparing my kids to be future leaders? Are they learning leadership skills and critical thinking skills? I try to use a little street epistemology on our son from time to time. This is just a fun thing to do. But I want to know what he's thinking, and I really want to know why. Right? What do you think about building a wall along the southern border to keep people from coming here illegally? I asked. And he says, I don't think it's a good idea. Why not? How did you come to that conclusion? Well, as it turns out, even my 10-year-old knows that ladders and shovels and boats and airplanes exist. Yes, it's, of course, a slightly more complex issue than that, but I want him to learn how to question things that he believes are true. Ask the kids in your lives, do you think there should be a Bible class taught at your school? And let them talk through their reasons for their answer. Try to stay neutral, ask them questions to help them figure out if they've reasoned through that position. It's actually kind of fun. And not just with our kids, we have to have these conversations with people whose beliefs are different. Genuine, polite, in-person conversations. And enter into them with an agreement not to argue, not to put a check mark in the win column, but to better understand each other. Gently and respectfully challenge beliefs like the Bible should be taught in schools. Should we also teach the Bhagavad Gita? The Hindu Puranas? How would you feel if the Florida legislature were considering a bill requiring all public schools to teach a course on the Quran? Why? How did you come to that conclusion? Be a mirror to reflect their beliefs back to them. And you'll certainly run into some people who are just completely apathetic and care none about any of these issues. But if you can help them explore why that is, they may discover that they really should care. Allow your own positions to be challenged. Have I sufficiently reasoned my own position? Am I just agreeing with my tribe? I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, so as from time to time we have to let that error check software run on the hard drive. Ask questions. Question everything. You may have a great idea and fall into this trap of, I'm sure somebody else already thought of that. This almost happened to me about a year or so ago when I sort of started to consider how do we respond to this Project Blitz thing. And I'll take you quickly down that rabbit trail. I thought there's a lot that you and I can do individually. There's a lot we can do as organizations, as groups. But we need advocates in the legislature who are going to stand up and speak openly when this garbage bills get filed. And I realized I don't know who that would be. Obviously, friend of the cause, Carlos Guillermo Smith, Ana Escamani, right? Carlos has tweeted about separation of church and state. He's a clear advocate. Ana Escamani challenged Daniel's Bible bill. Who else? The Congressional Free Thought Caucus was formed in the U.S. House and has 10 members already. What if we had a state-level Free Thought Caucus? 4 or 5 other states now have secular caucuses. How would you even start that process? Who would I have to talk to? Is there enough interest? This is how my brain works, right? Would there be enough interest? Would it have a measurable impact? What's the process? So I reached out into the void and I said, hey, look, there's this idea that I had. I don't know if it's any good. I don't know if it's useful, but now there are gears starting to turn and people are sort of looking at this idea. Now, not every idea is going to work. I've had some really clanky ones, but there are good ideas in this group. Share them, get them out, ask the question. Vote. Vote in the primaries, the general, the midterms, and national, state, and local elections. Go to your school board meetings. Volunteer for a candidate you support. Go to your city council meetings. Call your representatives in government. Schedule a meeting with your lawmaker at their local office. Show up at town halls and ask questions of our elected officials about their position on real religious liberty, the separation of religion and government. You know, Project Blitz is all about state-level initiatives, and there are national organizations working to help us, but the key here, I think, is going to be more local and grassroots activism. Get involved. Run for office yourself. Now, after 5 years of podcasting, I have way too much damning audio out in the universe. I sprinkle the F-bomb powder into almost every sentence when I'm not doing stuff like this. But I've thought about running for office. Let's imagine that for just a second, right? A trans atheist person in Polk County running for office. Okay, well, and you may be thinking like me, come on, Sarah, I can't do that. But let me remind you, and I promise this will be the last time I'm going to pick on her today. We elected a demon buster exorcist to the Florida House and a giant toddler to the highest office in the land. The political views and opinions expressed during this presentation are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Humanists of Tallahassee, American Atheists, its members, or affiliates. Look, I'm just saying, consider running for office. You've probably got a good shot at this. And consider this. Daniels has already done a lot of damage since being elected in 2016. In the 2018 election, she won her primary race by over 2,500 votes and then ran unopposed as the incumbent despite investigations by an ethics commission into falsified tax filings surrounding her church properties. She sits on the House Education Committee. And before she got busted for false financial disclosures, she sat on the Public Integrity and Ethics Committee. Who is the science, evidence, and reason-based candidate going to be in that district? And you all, I hope, have an answer. That's up in your neck of the woods. Project Blitz targets more than just we, the secular people. We have to join forces with the other communities that these initiatives target and marginalize. So let's form and strengthen connections with secular groups and LGBTQ groups and women's rights groups, even faith leaders. We need rabbis and imams, yes, even Christian clergy who believe this is all unnecessary overreach, who understand the importance of separating religion from government because it protects them and their church too. And they're out there. Let's call them up and set an extra seat at the table of ideas. And this can't be the work solely of an organization or its board. These are personal connections that you all may have already as individuals that you can reach out to and bring into the coalition. And support the organizations that are already primed and willing to offer resources back to us. There are a lot of organizations at every level that we can put our time, energy, and money into. Become a member. When representatives from these organizations can sit across from our elected officials to advocate for evidence-based solutions in legislation, and they can say, our organization represents X number of your constituents, or Y number of Floridians, or this percentage of Americans. And when we show up at the polls to back it up, there's some currency and leverage in. The organizations that support Project Blitz have a considerable head start on us and a ton of money. We have to do some catching up. In February 2018, 43 national organizations joined together in a statement opposing Project Blitz and similar legislative efforts. Some of these names you're going to find familiar. American Atheists, of course, Secular Coalition from America, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the ACLU. But also included on this coalition were groups like African American Ministers in Action, Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, who produces a fantastic podcast if you're into podcasts. Look up the BJC podcast. The Episcopal Church, Muslim, Presbyterian, and Methodist groups, and LGBTQ rights organizations. Finally, there is united opposition to these efforts. And without getting complacent, we can take some comfort in that. I'm also comforted to know that in this very group, there are leaders and members and volunteers of the Humanists of Tallahassee who are already doing great work around this, planning out how best to respond to Project Blitz. Where do I fit into that? How can you best contribute? How are we part of the solution? There will be disagreement in how best to approach this, which items should have our highest focus. But let's remember that we are all far more alike than we are different, and that when we bring our unique skills and talents together in a common cause, we find power. So I hope this leaves you with a better understanding of the nature and the massive scale of this effort, and I hope that you're already thinking of how your own expertise and skills and passions can be focused toward this goal of leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it by fighting for a secular government that represents and respects all people. Put up my contact information here if you want to get in touch. Check out the Sarah Talk podcast, just not at work, because there's a lot of sweary words. If you are still working now, check out Free Thought in Florida is a YouTube program that we do with the atheist community of Polk County. And just thank you all so much for having me here to share this information with you. It's been a privilege and an honor, and I'm happy if anybody has any questions, I can talk about this or local organizing or podcasting or YouTubing or rum and coke or whatever you'd like me to talk about.
Yay, that was really great. I'm going to unmute everybody. If you have questions, you can ask them. Just unmute your own microphone. I think you should all be technically unmuted at the moment. Maybe not. Hold on. I'm not very good at this. Okay, maybe not.
It's all new.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, I hit the unmute all and everyone's muted. Okay. Maybe not. So if you...
There you go.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Tony.
Yes.
I know you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted, first of all, I want to make a comment. I was very impressed at the end there because of all the organizations that you mentioned that were all have formed this this attack. I shouldn't say attack, but this assault on Project Blitz. That's pretty impressive. It always impresses me how even when I got started in this, I didn't know. I thought I was the only atheist in Tallahassee, and then suddenly I find a whole group, and all of a sudden now I find so many people, and it's just encouraging to find that group and that support. And yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. One of the things that we tend to do is become distracted by arguing issues that don't need to be argued and should be left for some other time. And we need to concentrate on organizing ourselves a little bit better. When this lady, Kimberly Daniels, presented her bill last year, I was very surprised that freedom from religion did not come to anybody in Tallahassee. They went to somebody in Orlando, which was fine. But I thought, we're here. And why nobody knew who we were, I guess. And so through Devon's help and through everybody else's help, we formed the Humanists of Tallahassee. And we're trying to do exactly what what you said we should do, organize and try to present ourselves as a source of information for these groups. So it wasn't exactly a question, but mostly comments.
Well, let me tell you, I appreciate that because you gave me a couple of things to kind of play off of. When we talk about, getting distracted, a couple of points. I'm also, not to get too political, I'm also very anti-capitalist. And because I belong in a certain class economically where work is so much of my time that I don't get to focus on the important things like this sort of work and like my family that I would like to do. I would love to be able to spend more time on things that I find more important than punching a clock to make somebody else some money, really. And so I think we're seeing in this whole COVID thing You know, the idea of tying our healthcare and our value in humans, tying all of that to work and productivity is not going to be a thing that lasts. We've got to figure out another way to value people, and ensure that people have healthcare and a place to sleep and food to eat tonight and all of these things. So that's just my political rants about that. But on organizing, you have no idea how thankful we are that you all are there and right around there, and that we know you and can reach out, because we're all the way down here in Polk County and we aren't there. And you only get so much watching the Florida Channel thing, or what you see in the news, and it's not the same as Devin walking out of a session and calling and saying, hey, here's what actually went down in that room. And knowing that there are those of you who are there to advocate for things that are going to impact everyone in Florida is absolutely huge. So I'm thrilled that you guys are there and doing what you're doing.
Just real quick, if you are going to ask a question, go ahead and unmute. But if you're not asking a question, if you could please mute your microphone so we could get rid of some of the background noise, that would be great. Does anybody else have any questions or comments they'd like to ask Sarah? Every time I hear about Project Blitz, I'm reminded about why I drink a lot, and it's terrifying what's going on, just even so close to home with our legislature. So if we could get a Florida Free Thought Caucus,
wouldn't that be great?
I'd be so happy. I would be so happy.
And
There'd be
I
2 people in it, but
well, and there's a part of me that's still like learning what all that really means. Like, what kind of, does that have any weight or power? And looking how the national, the Congressional Free Thought Caucus works is, it's more of a we all wear the same badge sort of thing. There's not a whole lot of legislative power in it yet. It will get that as it grows, but now it's just a way to sort of, put your hand in the air and say, hey, this is where I stand on these sorts of issues. Another thing about organizing that I'll add is, so the foundation, the atheist community of Polk County, we launched that in March. A year ago was March, April. Yeah, it's been a year, just over, that we founded the 501c3 and did all the things. And we're already at like 250 in our Facebook group, I think. So yes, it did like spark real fast. But there was a major need for it here. So we have very good groups in Orlando and Tampa, which are both an hour plus for any of our people to drive to. And so we were looking, like, we had gone to a few of the Central Florida Free Thought meetups and really liked a lot of the things that they were doing. But I've got a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, and driving into downtown Orlando, just forget it, especially with I-4 the way it is. And so we just kind of got to the point where I was lamenting having to, drive and give up the drive time, and there wasn't something more close to home, and my wife finally said, when are you going to quit bitching about it and actually do it? And so I said, well, you're right, because that's what you say to your wife. And so we just sort of jumped in, and the Facebook group, went from 2 to 4 to 10 to 20 to 30. And then we started getting that feedback. My God, I thought I was the only one here in Polk County. It's Polk County, you got Grady Judd showing up at church in his sheriff's outfit to speak. And, churches on every corner kind of place. But that giving a community to a group of people that thought they were alone is probably the most rewarding thing that I've been a part of in my life. Like, it's so rewarding just to be able to know that there are people out there that are like, well, I've made some new friends, and you have no idea how that's changed my life beyond all of the other stuff that we want to try to do, right? The legislative stuff, and getting out and sort of changing people's perspective of what an atheist is one of our main tenets of our organization, that we're going to go out and show that we are good people and we're not just assholes on the internet. And we're going to do that through helping people who are experiencing homelessness, and we're gonna, do food drives and school drives and all of that kind of stuff. And that's so important. But to have someone come back and go, I just think it's cool that there's 10 people that are like me here. I had no idea. And like, it's more than 10. You have no clue. There are so many of us. It's great. I love it. Sorry, you got me excited.
Yeah, and I also want to emphasize like your point about building connections and building alliances. That's helped tremendously this past year alone. I've been working with Equality Florida quite a bit, and they are fabulous. And most of our stuff, just the Venn diagram is very, I don't know, it's barely 2 circles. We also have we have some religious allies as well. I know I'm going to call her out. Kate Lanneman's on the call. She's with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and I met her online through a Project Blitz talk and through Allison. And like working with people like this is it's great. And I can't stress that enough, that reaching out beyond your group, your tribe is super important. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Devin and Sarah, This is Richard Hull in Tallahassee.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, how are you all? Thank you so much for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Elaine and I moved down here 16 years ago from New York State, naive about how religious Florida was. New York State was a delight in comparison. And I just want to emphasize our commitment to the kind of mission and drive that you both have shown this evening. And to say that while we are 79 and 80, we are all with you and would love to participate more. Just ask us.
You have the experience, right? You have the gift of knowledge and experience that the rest of us need to learn. Like when
we're both university professors, and Elaine is still a university professor at the ripe old age of 79. So she is my partner for 58 years. And we are just delighted to see a younger generation with the kind of passion that the both of you have shown. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Elaine. That means a lot. You guys are great.
I have a question.
Yes. Is this Mike Reed?
This is Mike Reed. Hi, Devin.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hi, I'm Mike Reed. I'm the president of the Washington Area Secular Humanists, which is a major secular organization in the Maryland, DC, and Virginia areas.
Awesome.
I'm also the assistant state director for Maryland for American Atheists. And one question I've been wondering is how successful other organizations have been in getting younger people to become active. And in WASH, we tend to be an older group. Not all of us, but definitely the average age is up there. And as you mentioned, the younger generation are the ones who have to inherit all this.
Right.
And in late middle age myself, I'm 57, I care about what's happening to the younger generation. And they also have the lowest voter turnout. They're the least religious demographic in the country. And they also have the lowest voter turnout, so low that they're pretty much politically irrelevant, almost.
Yep.
I just want to ask, do you have any suggestions, for example, how to get younger people motivated to participate in secular organizations? And I'd ask both you and Devin, what's the age demographic in your range? Is it also fairly old too in your organizations?
Ours probably skews more, it's probably a good bell curve, right? 30 to 50, sort of the larger of the demographic. I will share, I don't know how good we are at this yet. Again, we're such a new organization. But one of the things, so we were going to the Central Florida Free Thought Community meetups and love them to death. David and Jocelyn are just absolutely amazing. Free Flow, absolutely amazing. All of the stuff that they do is fan-freaking-tastic. But when we went each month to their speaker series, I had to bring my kids with me. So I don't have anywhere else to send them. There's nothing for kids to do. And so at the risk of sounding like, boy, we need to, we need to have a kids program like the churches do. Like at that risk, we really need to do something so that, and when we started our group, we sat down and said, I know we're not going to have the resources out of the gate, but when we do those meetings, and they're monthly at this point, and if they become weekly at some point, however it works out, we want to make sure that we're creating some sort of program, science, STEM stuff that kids can do that will be led by, led by a member of the community and maybe assisted by the older teen kids that help the younger kids, or however it looks, right? So that there is something for them when they come to these things. The worst part about church was the adult service and sitting and just, oh my God, it was awful as a kid. And my aunt would have a little pocket thing with a note paper, and we'd play the dot game or tic-tac-toe or whatever, because as a kid, you're just bored out of your mind. And I don't want, when I have a speaker come and present to my group, I don't want people to not bring their kids, because it's going to be like adult church. So yeah, it's trying to figure out, like, what does that look like? And do I have the volunteers who are willing to say, hey, look, I'll set out I'll give you 2 months out of the year, 2 out of your 12 meetings that I will help do this kids thing and not listen to the presentation. And I think we'll get to that point, but I would love to take them outside and, build stomp rockets and make slime and just do all kinds of neat things that are still educational and not indoctrinational. I don't know how many groups are doing stuff like that, or have a focus of that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's been suggested for us too. One issue you have to be careful of, though, I understand, is there's a liability issue.
Oh, yes.
If you take care of kids, and for small nonprofit all volunteer organizations, that's something we have to take into consideration.
Absolutely.
Devin, what's your age demographic breakdown in your organization?
It probably skews. There's some people on the call here that can chime in. It probably skews older. We're a lot newer of an organization, and so we're kind of building on the framework of previous groups. Like the Freethinkers Forum, which this is co-sponsored by, has been a staple of the Tallahassee community for years now, and it's a weekly discussion group pretty much, and that group tends to skew older, and so we're kind of building off that and going from there. And it's really not easy, I can say that. We have there's a Tallahassee Atheist Facebook group. It's just, all it is an online group, and there's about 600, 700 people on it. And I'll put stuff on, like, we're doing these events, we're doing this and that, and very little response. And we're also in Tallahassee because Florida State is in town, so you would think there would be a buy-in from them, and they're just starting to get a secular student association now, and it's with the pandemic, that's obviously off the tables for the moment since they can't do anything. But I don't know. It's a struggle to get newer people involved, but I think we just keep trying. We just keep doing it, and if no one shows up, whatever. It was, I show up at the park, tell people I'm going to be there with my kids. If you want to show up, go for it. And if no one shows up, it's 2 hours at the park with my kids, and 2 hours at the jungle, I don't know, wherever we go, bounce house. But you just keep showing up, you just keep trying, and eventually it'll click, hopefully. And that's what I'm going for. But okay, I think with a lot of the stuff that's like from the presentation today, like, this stuff gets me fired up, and I can even a younger me, this stuff would still fire me up, like, it just make me angry. And I feel like the more people know about this, because I know when I said let's have Sarah come in and give a discussion about Project Blitz, a lot of people in the group are like, I've never even heard of this. And it's so pervasive, and it's anger inducing. And I think if more people, young, old, everyone, knew what was going on and were just informed about it, I think they would be more apt to come in and participate. So there's that.
Maybe advertise more about Project Blitz. Like, we have a Facebook page with a lot of followers, and so that sort of thing. Maybe get people more aware of these insidious things like Project Blitz, which is attacking the very foundation of what this country's all about.
Yeah, totally.
We did when we very first started, the very first meeting we had at the library, I did a presentation on the ACEs program, which our group has adopted as well. And that was so great because when that was presented to us, we hadn't decided to do it yet. We had thought about, oh, this might be a good thing to do. And I sort of had in my mind, here's all the things that I would like to, if I'm going to make this, I'm going to make it for me and hope other people come, right? And so I had this idea of like, here's what I would want to do in a group like this. These are the things I would like it to be. And then the ACEs program was presented, and I was like, there it is in a PowerPoint. That's exactly all of the things that were in my head on this PowerPoint. And so when we started, and I'm not the kind of person that just like wades into the water and jump. And I do it to the extreme. It's the ADHD in me, I think. But so we just threw it at the wall. Whatever we could get the stick stuck, and whatever didn't, we sort of stepped away from. So the roadway cleanup was a huge hit. I think that's our most attended thing. We have the monthly educational series, the speaker series, at the library where we bring in a speaker, and 2 times a month or so, we go out and clean up 2.2 miles of roadway in Auburndale, and those are probably the 2 most well-attended events that we do. We tried to do socials. It was interesting because there was already a group in our area in Lakeland. It was the Lakeland Critical Thinkers and Humanists or something like that. And they had a huge following on Meetup. And so we reached out to the guys that ran that, and we're like, hey, don't know what you guys are into. This is what we're trying to do. Don't want to step on your toes. It's your territory, whatever. And they were like, God, no, if you have the time to do it, please do it. But other than, Buffalo Wild Wings once a month or so, we just don't have a lot of interest in let's go drink coffee together, or let's go, and every group is going to be different, right? So we just threw it at the wall. We said, we're going to do the social thing. We're going to do activisty things. So we've done, let's make some signs and go protest. There was a protest in the Kids in Cages thing that several of our people went out to. And just whatever our group seems to gravitate to is what we just do a little bit more of that. And as new people come in, we try to incorporate, you got to tell me what you're looking for, and we'll build that.
If you build it, they will come.
Well, WASH has been in existence for more than 30 years, and we're still going, but we're not growing, and it's a gray-haired organization mostly.
It's frustrating politically too, and again, this is Sarah speaking on behalf of Sarah, but when we look at what happened in politics in 2016, and you had this surge, and even in 2018 in the midterm, we had this surge of young people coming out to vote, and then Bernie comes out in 2020 and says, I will bring the young vote with me, and it just didn't happen. And it's you get in your head trying to figure out like what the hell is keeping these young people from getting engaged and getting involved and going out. Don't you see how important this stuff is? Don't you see how this affects you? And you just get all up in your head about it. But I'm here to tell you, as a Gen Xer, my parents didn't take me to vote. We didn't talk about politics in the house. I was apathetic to it until someone started trying to legislate against me as a trans person, and then I started to care, and now I'm all in. So people think tanks spend lots of time and money sitting around trying to figure out this very problem of how do we bring in a demographic. I wish I knew the answer.
Thank you.
That reminds me of a story. This is Tony Garcia. Back in Cuba, when Fidel Castro came into power, there was a lot of criticism, of course, of Fidel. And somebody made the observation that they called it the revolution of the corns, and that is that you weren't concerned until you were stepped on, they stepped on your foot and stepped on your corns. Then you became active against whatever it was. So anyway, that's just an aside. But thinking about what the gentleman from Washington said and what Devon said earlier, one of the things that we tried to do, or I looked at and saw, is that we have a tremendous number of young people in Tallahassee, the FSU, the FAMU, Tallahassee Community College, and yet it's hard to get anyone from those universities or schools to become involved or interested in any of what we're trying to do. And that seems to be one of the things I think what we should be trying to do. But again, there was a secular group at FSU for a while, and then it's disappeared. I don't know if it's going to start up again. Maybe they graduated, but that seems to be an area that, like Devon said or tried to mention, that if you take me out of the group, then you probably knock off 10 years of your average. But yeah, that's what I noticed, that when I joined the free thinkers and the other groups, the age was very high. The average age was very high, and I was asking the same questions: where are all the young people? So it's a challenge.
They're on TikTok. This is a funny thing. Like for legit, I saw this really funny meme about COVID-19. I don't know, we were talking about something, but the meme was something about like, look, the kids that you're trying to reach are not on Facebook. Like we're making all of these posts, and you're posting it on Facebook. They're not even on Instagram anymore. Now they're on TikTok. And so if you're not TikToking, then none of these kids are going to see anything that you do. I'm a Gen X kid. I grew up at the time when MySpace was dying and Facebook was coming in, and that's where I'm at. I have a Twitter. I hate it. I can't communicate in 240 characters. I need a whole 14-page presentation to communicate, you know? I can't communicate with a picture that doesn't allow me to add a link to it. Instagram doesn't do it for me. So even for me, I'm finding like the kids are not, I'm not on the technology platforms that the kids are on these days. Need to get me a TikTok.
Great. I'm going to stop the recording. You are everyone's welcome to stay and ask Sarah more questions if she can hang around.
Happy to stay.
But we want to thank you, Sarah, for coming to talk to us. High five, high five. All right.